Well, hello there, you amazing, beautiful, wonderful people. It's Friday, baby. It's Friday, and this is video 3 of 3. We did a live this morning, just talking about some confusion in the Liam Payne case. As on one hand, it would seem that the prosecutor's office would release information that would say that there's going to be an appeal, and they're going to go ahead and try and get Rogelio Norris and them held accountable for the death of Liam Payne, and then the site goes down, it's hidden. It's a bit of a mess, because then you've got other places like NME, Rolling Stone, turn around saying everything's denied. So we spoke about that briefly, and then I covered the audio in the 911 in video 2, and this is video 3, where we're talking about the Goncalves family again. Look, this ain't about how can I say this ain't a hit piece. This is, I'm trying to get my head around certain things. Jules of All Trades did a video. I'll put the link in the description of this video that will show you that she's released multiple statements. You know, that she's been in the messages on an Idaho University page, and she's given information, and we're just going to talk about this one here quickly. I'll put it on the screen. It says the state's final report from their crime lab is inconclusive, meaning he cannot be excluded. That's my assumption. The only DNA confirmation in the entire case is the sheath. If the defense is able to sway opinion or create doubt on that, it would be easier if there were no other sources of DNA. So we can all interpret that in different ways, right? First of all, I have to consider the behaviour and the statements that the Goncalves family have made. And I have to also understand that I don't have skin in the game. In terms of I've lost nobody in this crime. So, you know, the way I look at it is going to be very different than someone who is affected by having the grief sort of affecting your mindset and how you view things. And that can have a compounding effect when you're seeing things, you're hearing things, you've got the grief and all of this. So I appreciate that entirely. But there are certain things that just not, in my opinion, forgivable, because I have to consider why certain things are happening, what these things are, and try and make sense of them. And when I can't, I then question it, because I come down on the side of the only thing that makes sense is that things are being done for monetary gain, especially when I'm seeing a huge amount of monetary gain. Because in that post, it would say that Kaylee Goncalves' sister doesn't really know anything. She doesn't really know anything. She is speculating on the information. She's interpreting it, and she's saying, this is my interpretation. But then the flip side of it is she exits that as if she's saying, we want the other DNA excluded, because if there's doubt cast on Bryan Kohberger, then we don't want them to be able to look at anybody else, because that will just confuse things. We want them to focus on Bryan Kohberger. So I'm then thinking to myself, but hold on a second, so you're willing, as a family, to ignore the fact that there's other DNA at the scene, and you just want them to focus on Bryan Kohberger, that there's doubt upon the evidence that places him there in the first place. I can't work it. I genuinely can't work it out. And I have to ask the question, has this family sold out and sold Kaylee down the river because it's easier to obtain a following, a lucrative following, by following a certain dynamic in the crime, a certain narrative? Do you know what I mean? That if you are following mainstream media and you can latch onto them stories, and you can push the Bryan Kohberger is guilty stories that I showed yesterday. You know, we're talking about certain people who have clearly had no real involvement in this case whatsoever in terms of, you know, creators, and they just dip the toes in it to stay relevant. They bullshit and lie and talk utter shit and get fucking even the easiest things wrong and get hundreds of thousands of views, 600,000 views in some of their videos, and they're wrong. And you've got a family who you would think, in the quest, in the hunt for justice, you want your child, your loved one, to get justice. Whoever did this crime, whoever took them away from you, to be held accountable. And if that's execution, then that's execution. And then I think, well, if you haven't got any other issue, no other access to information that we have, so you're seeing what we do, and all there is a variable in how you accept that, receive it, and process it, then how can you ignore the fact that there is indicators around this crime that something else was going on? You know, again, I covered earlier that Olivia had spoken specifically about the surviving roommates, and again, she seemed to allude to the fact that you just want to kind of grab them and shake them, because the answer to everything was so close, in that if you'd have just did this, it could have changed things. If you heard something and acted and reacted, could it have changed things? But hindsight's a motherfucker, isn't it? But in this, we're actively seeing a member of the family who was trying to twist the narrative in a certain way that isn't true. The Brian Kohberger's DNA was not around Madison Mogen. It wasn't. There was independent testing done, and it wasn't. And it's stated within the court documentation that the prosecution would themselves bring evidence forward. And it makes you wonder whether that was done strategically to cover their ass, because they had seen that this DNA was at the crime scene, and it was apparently disregarded because the FBI give them Brian Kohberger's name, which again I covered yesterday, saying, in my opinion, it feels that Brian Kohberger was someone who was on the FBI's radar. We know that there's this other crime in the background that his parents had to go to the grand jury over, the Dana Smithers murder, and he would later be kind of exonerated from that, if you like. He was a person of interest, it would appear, and this made them, especially the lead investigator Payne, come away from what I believe would have been his standard methodology of investigation, and that would have been, he goes to a scene, he sees DNA, gets DNA, and I feel that he would have progressed through them, and he would have pushed that down the entire track. But the FBI intervene and say, no, look at this is what you want to look at. But at every turn there is a question. At everything that you want to say, oh, Brian Kohberger is involved in this crime, there is nothing concrete, and there is evidence that supports and suggests there is potential for other people to be involved. But even the family of one of the victims is happy to not only continue to lie, to propagate lies against the accused, but to ignore evidence that's there. And I can't make head or tail of it. I can't work out why. Someone please make sense of it. Again, are we just saying that this is solely because of being affected by grief, and the horrendous nature of this crime has led them to not be able to see and to think clearly enough to understand what is going on here, and as that in turn led them into the realms of confirmation bias themselves? But I would have at least expected Steve Goncalves, who seemed very open at one point, to understand that there was a need for slowing down, and understanding that you need it to go through the process for everything to be laid on the table. Now, what has changed? What has changed? Because in my unpopular opinion, it seems to me that the only thing that's changed is the ability to monetize this crime, monetize the death, and you've formed an army around you of certain people that you now can't let down. You've gone too far down the road. What would happen if you all of a sudden turned around and uploaded a post on the Goncalves Army page and said, hold on a second, there's 3 other lots of DNA there. What if it's not Brian Kohberger? And why hasn't that been done? Surely you can't ignore that unless you know more about it, which would seem to suggest by Olivia's post alone that removes any indication that you have any additional knowledge than what we have. So if that genuinely is the case and you know nothing, then why are you ignoring it? Why are you willing to ignore it? Make it make sense. Mwah.